He was the most legendary cave diver the world had ever known. A quiet high school math teacher from Florida who had silently transformed himself into the undisputed master of surviving the planet's most hostile and unforgiving environments. On April 6, 1994, Sheikh Exley descended into Zakatin, a colossal vertical water-filled shaft plunging more than 1,000 feet into absolute darkness. No human being had ever reached its true bottom. Exley planned to change that forever, but something went terribly wrong deep in that silent abyss. His dive computer stopped recording at 906 feet. He never returned. There were no frantic bubbles, no desperate escape attempts, no signs of panic. Only a profound, haunting stillness. Many who knew him best believed that when he realized he could not make it back, he made the most deliberate choice of his life. He simply stopped fighting. This is the story of one diver, one impossible depth, and a final decision that continues to haunt the entire cave diving community to this day. To those who lived and breathed technical diving, Sheikh Exley was far more than just famous. He was the real thing, the gold standard. He literally wrote the rule book. His groundbreaking manual, Basic Cave Diving, a blueprint for survival, remains the foundational text still used to train new generations of divers around the world. He was the first person in history to dive beyond 800 feet on open-circuit scuba. He shattered depth records, survived catastrophic equipment failures, and pioneered almost every modern safety protocol that technical divers now take for granted. Yet Exley was never reckless. He was the opposite: deliberate, analytical, and almost obsessively methodical. He was the kind of person who prepared backup plans for his backup plans, carrying multiple layers of redundancy and contingency for every conceivable scenario. He did not chase danger for the adrenaline rush. He chased knowledge, understanding, and the quiet satisfaction of pushing the absolute limits of human capability with precision and control. And Zakatin represented the final, greatest mystery of them all, the deepest, darkest, most elusive target on Earth. He was ready for it. Before we descend any deeper into this tragedy, it is essential to truly understand what Zakatin actually is. Located on a remote private ranch in northeastern Mexico, the sinkhole is surrounded by towering limestone cliffs and dotted with floating islands of grass that drift lazily across its surface. To the casual observer, it looks almost peaceful. A calm, still pool of blue water nestled in the quiet countryside. But beneath that deceptively tranquil surface lies something vast, ancient, and utterly deadly. Zakatin is the deepest known water-filled sinkhole in the world, plunging more than 1,080 feet straight down. Early explorations in the 1990s using weighted lines confirmed what the human eye could never see. There was simply no visible bottom, only layer after layer of impenetrable darkness. Strangely, the water itself was warm, almost inviting, with no perceptible current. The conditions seemed almost too perfect for an ultra-deep dive. Yet this was no tourist-friendly cave. Zakatin did not narrow or twist like so many others. It dropped straight down like falling into an upside-down Everest. A perfect vertical shaft of crushing pressure, silence, and infinite black. Sheikh Exley had decided it was finally time to plant his flag at the bottom. But he also knew this was not the kind of dive you could improvise. For nearly a full year, he and his close friend and fellow elite diver Jim Bowden prepared with meticulous, almost military-level precision. They would not be diving side by side to avoid any risk of entanglement. Instead, each man would follow his own separate descent line. Along both routes, dozens of decompression tanks were carefully staged at exact depths. Every cylinder precisely placed, labeled, and rigged for quick access. They were diving open circuit on custom mixed gas blends of helium, nitrogen, and oxygen, carefully formulated to minimize the twin demons of nitrogen narcosis and oxygen toxicity. Even with all this preparation, everyone understood the truth. This was not safe. This was the absolute bleeding edge of what the human body and existing technology could endure. Their sole objective was to finally reach the true bottom of Zakatin, to accomplish what no human had ever done before. Every decompression table had been calculated and recalculated. Every possible emergency scenario had been anticipated and planned for. By all accounts, they were as ready as any team could possibly be. Yet, as the cave would soon prove in the cruelest way imaginable, no amount of preparation can fully protect you when you venture this far beyond the known. On the morning of April 6, 1994, by 9:50 a.m., the water of Zacaton lay perfectly calm as the support team gathered at the edge. Exley and Bowden suited up in silence, preparing to swim through the ominous 600-foot tunnel known as El Paseo de la Tortuga Muerte, the passage of the dead turtle, just to reach the main shaft of the sinkhole. They surfaced inside the cenote, floating silently across the still water for one final equipment check. Two of the greatest cave divers in the world were about to vanish into the deepest sinkhole ever explored. Then they dropped. Bowden began his descent at a rapid but controlled 100 feet per minute, following a meticulously structured dive plan that called for precise gas switches at exact depths to prevent tremors, narcosis, or blackout. At around 800 feet, he glanced sideways through the hazy water and caught a faint, distant glow, Sheck Exley's dive light, still visible in the gloom. That was the last time any living person ever saw Sheck Exley alive. Bowden continued downward for a short time longer, but soon encountered a serious problem. At 925 feet, he realized he was consuming gas far faster than his calculations had predicted. His tank pressures were dropping dangerously low. With no other choice, he made the disciplined decision to abort the dive and begin the long, grueling, carefully staged descent and decompression process that would take hours. Meanwhile, Exley kept going deeper. His dive computer would later reveal that he had reached a maximum depth of 906 feet. And then, nothing. The computer simply stopped recording. There were no signs of an emergency ascent, no sudden burst of bubbles, and no indication of distress, only silence. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened in those final moments. But the people who understood the risks better than anyone have offered the most plausible explanations based on everything that was known about Exley and the extreme environment he entered. One strong possibility is high-pressure nervous syndrome, or HPNS. Exley had already experienced its terrifying effects before. At 863 feet during a dive in South Africa, he had suffered muscle spasms, double vision, and disorientation. HPNS is unpredictable and becomes an ever greater threat beyond 900 feet. Another silent killer could have been carbon dioxide buildup. If he was working harder than he realized or breathing less efficiently under the crushing pressure, CO2 could have accumulated rapidly in his bloodstream. Combine that with the very real risk of oxygen toxicity at such extreme depth, and even a single imperfect breath could have triggered a sudden convulsion. There is also evidence that both of his primary tanks were completely empty when he was eventually found. Some experts believe he may have accidentally switched to a gas mix intended for a much shallower decompression stop. At that depth, such a mistake would have been instantly catastrophic, leaving him without sufficient gas for buoyancy control. Unable to inflate his BCD, he would have begun a slow, inexorable descent. But perhaps the most haunting detail of all is what rescuers discovered when they finally located his body. He was not tangled in the line. There were no signs of panic, no desperate clawing at the guideline, and no damage to his equipment. Instead, Exley's body was found gently wrapped around the descent line, almost peacefully, as though he had known exactly where he was and had calmly accepted that this was where he would remain. Many who knew him best believe that when Sheck realized he could not make it out, he made a final, deliberate choice. He stabilized himself, took control of the only thing he still could, and let go. It was a controlled, dignified act from a man who had valued control above all else throughout his entire life. It is only a theory, of course, but those who dove with him and knew his character say it fits perfectly. If there was one defining trait that defined Sheck Exley, it was control. Even when staring death in the face, he refused to thrash or panic. Every diver who has studied the case closely says the same thing. He died exactly as he had lived, disciplined, focused, and deliberate. One tank still contained gas. The guideline remained perfectly intact. There was no evidence of any struggle for survival. It was as if he had calmly assessed the situation, understood the finality of it, and taken his last position with quiet acceptance. People often ask why anyone would go that deep. Why risk everything to explore a black pit that might not even have a bottom? For Sheck Exley, the answer was never about thrill-seeking. It was about pushing the frontier of human knowledge, testing the absolute edge of what was possible with discipline, precision, and profound awareness. He was not there for danger itself. He was there for discovery, and no one understood the risks better than he did. You might not come back, but if you did, you would have earned it, inch by inch and breath by breath. Zacaton does not look deadly from the surface. Its water is warm, calm, and peaceful, with no strong currents or swirling eddies. Just a still, blue circle in the middle of a quiet Mexican ranch. But it plunges deeper than almost any other place on Earth. It is not jagged rocks or narrow tunnels that kill you there. It is the silence, the pressure, and the way the environment lulls you into believing it is safe. That is the trap, and exactly what makes it so lethal. And yet this story is only the beginning. Our next tale takes the danger even further, into one of the most emotionally charged and haunting sacrifices in the entire history of cave diving. On January 8, 2005, Dave Shaw entered Bushman's Hole, a remote sinkhole in South Africa nearly 900 feet deep. He was not chasing another record. He was on a mission to bring someone home. That someone was Dion Deere, a young diver who had vanished in the same cave 10 years earlier. Shaw had seen Dion's perfectly preserved body during a previous dive, and now he was returning to recover it. This is the story of a mission planned with extraordinary care, executed with profound courage, and remembered as one of the most moving and tragic acts of sacrifice the cave diving world has ever witnessed. Dave Shaw was not a lifelong diver. He was a highly respected airline captain who had spent decades flying through the skies. But when he discovered cave diving in his mid-40s, he threw himself into it with the same intense discipline and focus he had always brought to aviation. In just 5 short years, he advanced from basic open-water recreational diving to becoming one of the most respected technical cave divers on the planet. What set him apart was never recklessness. It was his unmatched mental discipline and his commitment to staying in peak physical condition for the brutal demands of deep exploration. In October 2004, Shaw achieved a historic descent to 270 meters, 886 feet, in Bushman's Hole using a closed-circuit rebreather. It was the deepest cave dive ever completed on that type of equipment at the time. Yet for Shaw, it was never about setting records or seeking fame. He cared only about precision, mastery, and doing the impossible the right way. Bushman's Hole, or Boesmansgat in Afrikaans, is no ordinary dive site. It sits isolated in the middle of the windswept Kalahari Desert in South Africa. From above, it appears deceptively peaceful, but below the surface it drops almost 900 feet straight down in a black vertical tunnel carved through ancient rock. There is no current, no natural light, only bone-chilling cold and pressure so extreme it tests the limits of even the most advanced equipment. The high altitude, nearly 5,000 feet above sea level, makes the dive even more dangerous because the thinner air increases decompression times and overall risk. This cave had already claimed lives before, and it would claim another on this day. In 1994, a 20-year-old South African diver named Dion Deere had disappeared while helping set up guidelines in Bushman's Hole. Something went wrong near 270 meters, and his body was never recovered at the time. For 10 long years, Dion remained suspended in the cold, oxygen-poor water, perfectly preserved by the extreme conditions. A small plaque placed by his grieving family and fellow divers marked the surface as a somber reminder of the risks and the cost of pushing too far. On October 28, 2004, during his record-setting dive, Dave Shaw discovered Dion's body floating eerily upright in the blackness. Without panic, he calmly clipped a line to the harness so he could locate it again later. When he surfaced, he carried a new sense of purpose. This was no longer just about breaking records. It had become a mission to bring Dion home. Just 10 weeks later, on January 8, 2005, Dave Shaw returned to Bushman's Hole with a carefully assembled team. Alongside his close friend and experienced deep diving instructor Don Shirley, Shaw brought 8 backup divers, surface coordinators, and even a cameraman, Gordon Hiles, to document the recovery. Every detail had been mapped out: decompression stops, redundant breathing systems, emergency protocols. Surface Marshal Vera Van Schaik, herself a deep diving record holder, coordinated the entire topside operation. The plan was complex and high risk, but for Shaw it was worth every danger. Dion had been down there long enough. When Shaw finally reached Dion's body at nearly 270 meters, everything initially seemed to be going according to plan. But there was one critical factor no one had anticipated: gas buildup inside Dion's dry suit. After 10 years underwater, decomposition had created pockets of gas that made the body unexpectedly buoyant. As Shaw carefully tried to place the body into a recovery bag, it began to rise and twist in the water. The sudden movement tangled the lines, the bag, the harness, and parts of Shaw's own equipment into a chaotic knot. His rebreather loop became caught. At nearly 900 feet, task overload is almost inevitable. The mind slows, narcosis clouds judgment, and CO2 buildup can lead to confusion and unconsciousness. Shaw was now juggling entanglement, shifting buoyancy, and equipment stress while fighting to stay alive in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. It became too much, and yet, somehow he remained calm. His helmet camera, recovered later, captured those final minutes in haunting detail. There was no screaming, no thrashing, no desperate fight for the surface. Only steady, controlled breathing as he continued trying to fix the bag and adjust his gear. His final recorded words, spoken with quiet clarity rather than fear, were heartbreakingly simple. "Dave not coming back." It was not resignation, it was acceptance. Those who knew him and studied the footage believe he was not panicking. He remained focused on the mission even as it became clear it would cost him everything. Above him, Don Shirley was also struggling. He had descended to provide support but became caught in the same tangle of lines. As he hung in the blackness, he looked down and saw only one light, then none. Shaw's beacon slowly faded into stillness. Shirley, barely holding on, began his own damaged descent. He suffered a loop failure and later severe decompression sickness that temporarily disabled him, but he survived. 10 hours later, both bodies, Dave Shaw's and Dion Deer's, floated to the surface together, still tangled, still connected. In the end, Dave succeeded in his mission. He brought Dion home. The price was his own life. Dave Shaw's final dive ended a decade of grief for Dion's family. His body was finally recovered, giving them the closure they had waited 10 long years for. The story was later powerfully documented in the 2020 film Dave Not Coming Back, a deeply moving reflection on risk, sacrifice, and the bonds that drive people to the edge. Within the cave diving community, Dave Shaw's choice remains legendary. Some call it heroism. Others see it as a tragic overstep. But no one questions his profound commitment. He is remembered not only for his technical skill and record-breaking depths, but for his unwavering focus on something greater than himself, for the courage to keep going when others might have turned back, and for the loyalty that led him to risk everything to bring a lost diver home. His story stands as a stark and unforgettable reminder that even the most disciplined minds and the best-laid plans can meet their match when nature and physics conspire at the absolute edge of human limits. Dave Shaw did not return to Bushman's Hole for glory or fame. He went back for purpose, for loyalty, and to finish what he had started. Those closest to him said it best. Dave always needed to reach the bottom of things, whether it was a mystery, a mission, or a literal hole in the earth. That final dive was never just about going deeper. It was about principle. And in the end, he reached the bottom in more ways than one. The question that still lingers, one that no camera, no recording, and no slate can ever fully answer, is this: did Dave Shaw know he was not coming back? Did he consciously choose the mission over his own life? Or was it simply the cruel convergence of narcosis, entanglement, and CO2 buildup at the worst possible moment? The recordings leave only silence and a kind of sacred ambiguity. And perhaps that is where the true weight of the story lies, not in how it ended, but in the extraordinary calm with which it was faced. At that depth, there is no room for panic, only presence and intention. Whatever Dave Shaw's final thoughts were in those last moments, they belong to him alone. If these stories have left you breathless, you are in good company. We tell the tales of those who dared to go deeper than anyone thought possible, into caves, into danger, and into the very limits of human control. If you want more real-life accounts of caving disasters where every second matters and calm decides everything, hit subscribe and stay with us. Because at the edge of human possibility, every choice echoes forever.